workers of the hand and workers of the mind. Schleiz, Thuringia, January 18th, 1927. My fellow Germans, I don't know if all the meetings here are this well attended, but I hardly think so. Why then have you turned up in greater numbers today than usual? Simply because there is an election to be debated? No, not at all. You know very well that there have been elections for decades, and you also suspect that there will probably be elections in the decades to come. You have never been completely satisfied in previous years, and you will not be satisfied by the elections to come. What brings you here is not the hope that I will read you out a long recipe for a cure. You do not expect the fulfillment of what the election speakers promise you. They themselves no longer believe they can perform miracle cures. What is actually decided by such an election? You know how things are today. Thuringia is no exception. Here, too, it is not to be expected that a new worldview will suddenly come to the helm, but it is rather likely that coalitions will have to be formed again, whether of the right or of the left or in the center. The various partners in such a coalition ensure that the policy of the center remains, that if possible no one completely prevails, but that the previous general line of development more or less continues. You yourselves know what decisions are being made today in the German Reichstag, for example. The German Reichstag is not a sovereign institution. It has nothing to command and nothing to decide on except what has been prescribed for the fulfillment of the peace treaties. The situation of the German people today seems to me like that of a sick person. I know that many people say to us, "How can you keep saying that we are sick? Daily life goes on as before." This sick person, you see, eats every day, works every day. How can you claim that he is sick? But it is not a question merely of whether a people is still alive, whether the economy is working. It is by no means said that a person is healthy because he can still eat and work. The surest sign is the feeling of the human being himself. He feels whether he is healthy or sick. It is exactly the same in the life of nations. Nations are often sick for a long time, often for generations, without the individual members being able to fully explain the nature of the sickness. A few days ago, I was in Eisenach and stood on the Wartburg, where a great German once translated the Bible. At that time, the world was also sick. Many tried in vain to patch things up, until finally a very powerful figure came along, a great man who got to the root of the evil of his time. He triggered a movement that would not have completely eliminated human suffering, but which pointed out a new path that was decisive. That is exactly how it is today. No one will claim that the German people is healthy. It is sick, and this feeling of being sick moves our whole nation today. Some, of course, feel good about it. There are those who flourish precisely when the nation is sick, whose flourishing is indirect proof of the general crisis. This crisis will always and forever be twofold. It is not only a crisis in material terms, it is above all a crisis in spiritual, moral, and ethical terms, even if most people do not want to believe this, because they feel only the material need. The latter could not occur if it were not for the spiritual crisis. This is especially true of the present time, and this is also why you have come here. In this hall, there are supporters and opponents of our movement. The supporters came to hear their leader, and the opponents came to hear the leader of this enemy movement. But those who believe fanatically in one idea, for example, a religious idea, do not go when someone preaches another idea. If I am firmly rooted in my faith, then another one does not interest me at all. You have come here, even if you are perhaps not aware of it, because you are dissatisfied with what has gone before. Neither the man of the left nor the man of the right is satisfied. I do not want to divide the German people into small parties, but into two broad halves. One half comprises those who call themselves and think of themselves as nationalists. The other half those who just as consciously call themselves internationalists. On the one side, the national bourgeoisie, and on the other, the international proletariat. Within these two groups, there is a continuous movement back and forth, in one direction or another. Why? The people are not completely satisfied with the results of their politics, but they sometimes feel that the tendency to which they belong at the moment is failing. They thus wander within the broader group, sometimes a little more to the left, sometimes a little more to the right, and search around, believing that perhaps in the other camp things can be better than before. What political goal does the right have? I would like to ask you to put aside small daily goals, teachers' salaries, civil servants' pensions, etc. The political aim of the right wing of our people was, in general, as follows: to establish a great and powerful German Reich, a Reich of strength, to secure perfect freedom for this Reich through the cultivation of a sense of national honor, of national pride, and through the maximum development of national military power, to win for our people its place in the sun and to retain this place. A national Reich, powerful externally and free internally. If we recall this goal today and compare it with reality, you must admit that it has not been achieved. We will talk about the reasons later. The fact is, Germany did not retain its power, its strength, or its greatness. The German form of government at home was not preserved. The organ of German defense, the source of strength of our people, was not preserved, nor has the final and most important thing been achieved. On the contrary, of 30 million adult men and women, 15 million reject the national idea outright. They say they are international, that they have nothing to do with the national idea. It is not that we were close to the goal before, or that we were on the march to the goal. From decade to decade, you on the right have moved further away from your goal, and today you are further away than ever. And you have grown old during this evolution. You can no longer hope to fight a battle against fate at 60 years old that you were once unable to fight at 30 or 40 years old. This generation has failed and blundered, and now it is leaving world history, and not gloriously. It has inherited a great empire from its fathers, and has squandered this inheritance miserably. I will address the reasons and the excuses later. First of all, I simply wish to establish that the political goal of the right was not achieved, and what of the left? Its aim was to create a global coalition of proletarian states, that is, of states completely free from militarism and capitalism, the creation of a new world on the corpses of the vanquished anti-socialist states. And if here again you refrain from all explanations and interpretations and concern yourself only with the whole bare reality, then, my friends on the left, you must admit your strict aim has also not been achieved. The world today is more divided than ever before. What is called the League of Nations is a ridiculous entity, ridiculous like perhaps our old German Reich before 1871. World history walks all over this so-called League of Nations as if it did not exist at all. The states are arming themselves day after day. Militarism has not been broken, nor has capitalism been broken, but has risen to become the general world order. And what we see in Germany, is this supposed to be the victory of socialism? Here too, it is understandable that one is dissatisfied. His newspaper can tell him every day about the events of the day and so on, but he cannot get over the fact that he has to admit to himself at some point that the whole struggle has been in vain. Today, an army of the unemployed separates us from social well-being. It is not decreasing, but on the contrary, increasing. When I speak to nationalist politicians today and say to them, please admit that you have failed. 15 million no longer want to have anything to do with the national idea, and that is the most appalling thing there can be. I get the answer, yes, but look at the people. They are riffraff. Go down among them now. The people are not worth talking to. There is only one reply to this. If it is true that 15 million consciously reject the national idea out of wickedness because they are rabble, riffraff, and scoundrels, then what is the point of any further political activity? With what material do the gentlemen of the right intend to save Germany? Their fragmented bourgeoisie, perhaps? No. Under such circumstances, any further struggle is of no value. It is futile. Fate has spoken. Our nation is destined to perish. But if that's the case, then why not summon up the courage to go before the people and declare that since they do not want to admit that they have failed, that they have no interest in politics, that there is no point in doing politics anymore. Yet these gentlemen stand up again to ask for your votes. But it is not out of malice that 15 million do not share the national feeling. You see, I cannot judge people by the situation of the moment. Of course, it is more convenient and easier to declare that 15 million are swine than to admit that one is mistaken, or that one has misrepresented an idea. One might say that people are worthless. Why worthless? I cannot assess the value of a person according to his wealth, his birth, or anything like that. All that means nothing. it is no measure of value. If I were to remove from society a good-for-nothing who had been born rich, I would do no harm to the nation. But if I were to take away a worker, of the hand or of the mind, who faithfully performs his duty, it would harm the nation. The value of a man depends on the value that his deeds create. A man does not become a poet or a thinker, a musician, a composer, a great inventor, etc., only by his own will. A higher nature gives him this disposition in the womb. A man may be praised because he is a genius, but his abilities mean nothing if he is not able to put them to the service of all. He can just as well be an ingenious criminal, a good-for-nothing, or, as they say in Bavaria, a Schwabinger. These are the inhabitants of a district of Munich, a very special kind of people, where apart from a few exceptions, the females are characterized by particularly short hair, and the males by correspondingly long hair. These ingenious personalities, from whom only the most ingenious statesmen emerge now and then, such as a Kurt Eisner, if they were not there, the world would not suffer any loss. On the other hand, if I took away every street sweeper who conscientiously swept his square meter of the street, I would have to replace him with another. We should judge people according to the abilities given to them by nature, which they use for the common good. This standard completely excludes the accident of high or low birth, and makes man the forger of his own honor. The most humble human being, if he honestly and truthfully fulfills his assigned work in the service of the national community, may be replaceable, but he is not dispensable. If this standard is applied, I cannot say that the 15 million people of the left are worthless. You can't just take them away. You would have to replace them. Even if some of them are worthless, the first measure of value speaks for the 15 million. Every intellectual invention needs many hands to be translated into real life. The national community needs them. Only with them can it exist. These hands are no less valuable here than elsewhere. The German economy could not have begun its triumphal march were it not for the German worker. The industrialist would be astonished if he had to employ others instead of the German worker. He would not want to work with anyone else. He knows very well the value of the German worker. Just as the reasons from the right are not valid, those from the left are not valid either. The first major excuse is, we were stupid to seize power on our own. Well, that's your own fault. And the second is that if you ask a leader of the left, what do you hope to achieve with your internationalist and Marxist thought when 15 million reject it altogether? Then here too, you get the answer that these 15 million are just worthless and useless. They should have their heads cut off. I have to say the same thing here as I said earlier about the other side. What is the value of a human being? It is determined by the value he provides to the community. Can the German worker of the mind really be called worthless? Certainly not. There are thousands and thousands of hands at work in a factory from which a locomotive finally rolls out. But don't forget that before all of them there were the engineers who designed the machines and the chemists who made the alloys. You can't say today, away with the engineer, he doesn't belong to our party, off with his head. If it were only 3 or 4, you could do it. But with 15 million people, you can't do it. If millions of workers did not offer their strength for the realization of intellectual ideas, or if the minds did not constantly give plans to the hands, the people would not be able to rise from a primitive state. The interaction of mind and hand has produced the society in which we all participate today. What is the definition of militarism? I am told militarism is the drill. Militarism is the pomp and circumstance. Militarism is the military in itself. It is armament, etc. But if the military organization itself constitutes militarism, then England is just as militaristic as Switzerland, or indeed today's Soviet Russia. And if drill constitutes militarism, then Soviet Russia is also militaristic, for I do not believe that the boot on the parade march sounds softer on Russian soil than on German. I do not believe it. But even armament has nothing to do with it. Every state arms itself for its own purposes. You can say that in Russia they arm themselves for the purposes of the proletariat. In my youth I remember some large bakeries in Vienna, the Anker Bread Works and the Hammer Bread Works. They were rival enterprises and each belonged to a Jew. One of them baked bread in the name of the proletariat. The bread from the hammer was a little moist, it weighed a little heavier in the hand, and it was worse. They said, "But this bread is the bread of the proletariat." If one could not stand it, the answer was, please, I would rather eat a loaf of freedom than a loaf of slavery. At the end of the day, however, people prefer better dry bread to the worse freedom bread. This is also the case in Russia today. You can say that Soviet militarism is the armor of the proletariat. I don't know that one dies more comfortably in such an army, but I don't believe so. I felt the thrill of looming death in my own body for 4 years. I think that would have been just as unpleasant for you in the name of the proletariat. And if you had repeatedly cowered in fear of death during heavy shelling, I believe that even if you had worn a red coat instead of a gray one, you too would have finally said, damn it, won't it end soon? One cannot define things so easily. This is also true of capitalism. What does capitalism really mean? There are 3 terms which, taken together, make up what Marxism calls capital: machines, factories or workshops, and working capital. My dear friends, these 3 components of production cannot be destroyed, even if the communist and syndicalist movement wished to do so. That is to say, they could be destroyed, but with the result that we would achieve in Germany what was achieved in Russia, namely, that we would have to beg international capital, as they did in Russia, to rebuild it and put capital at our disposal again. And then we would have to grant concessions, as Soviet Russia did to Herr Stinnes. This was the same Herr Stinnes who would rather have cut off his fingers than have spoken 10 words to a Hitler for fear of being compromised, who was presented here as the capitalist terror, who did business with the Soviet Union, who built up big hotels and big factories there. They say yes, but there it was in the service of the proletariat. I don't believe that. I think Stinnes was always convinced that he was doing something for himself. Yes, as much as possible for himself, as little as possible for the proletariat. Besides, if these people are so devoted to the proletariat of other nations, then why not to their own? No, they do not think of it. The idea was put in the head of the German socialist that he could only be an internationalist, and he was taught that there are only other human beings. That is a blow against all experience and a blow against their own existence. One might easily say that man is man, just as dog is dog, whether dachshund or greyhound. Man is man, New Zealander or Teuton, Englishman or Zulu. Indeed, they are just as distinct from each other as one breed of dog from another. You know, it is really incredible that it was possible to preach the folly of internationalism to millions of people, and that people followed this idea, and that the Jew, who has been among us for thousands of years and yet remained a Jew, has managed to tell millions of us that race is completely meaningless, while for him, race is of the highest importance. What would it mean, then, if race were meaningless? It would mean that if I took the Germans away from here today and put them in Central Africa and brought the Negroes here, everything would look the same as if the Germans were here. The Negroes would create an equally cultivated state. Do not imagine that the jazz band would have created the culture that we have today. All that we see around us has been created by the collaboration of mental labor and physical labor over many millennia. And where do these inventors come from? Is there one significant invention that was made by a Negro? None at all. Even the most primitive work he has done, he has borrowed from the white man. Today they train him until he can play a Wagner opera on the piano. That is more a proof of the trainer's ability than the Negro's ability. And it is like that with everything. A Negro can certainly clean a light bulb, but he can't invent it. We have areas where different races have been active for thousands of years. Where the Aryan goes, culture prevails. When he leaves, it gradually disappears, and if he returns after 2,000 years, it may have been replaced by a desert, but he will bring it into being again. Culture is bound to people, and to certain peoples at that. If you take them away, in the long run, there will be nothing left. Do not expect a people that is so sick inside to be redeemed by an election like the next one in Thuringia. Go ahead and cast your ballot again for the rotten and sick party structures, and know that in 3 years you will be gathered in the hall just as you are now, and you will be listening to someone again, but nothing will have changed in the meantime, only the misery will perhaps be even greater. You will not have helped your people towards a social state by promising them milk and honey, and you will not have established a national paradise of freedom within a world that oppresses you. The prerequisite for both ideals is freedom. You will not achieve freedom for your people if you use only your fist or only your mind to achieve freedom, but mind and fist must work together. But you will achieve nothing at all until the division of the German people is eliminated. This division is only to the advantage of the international stock exchange and bank jobber. The two camps can no longer unite because too many people have an interest in their division. There are people who can only live from their division. Believe me, you will never manage a reconciliation of the people in Germany using today's parties. This reconciliation is the task of National Socialism. Our national thought is identical with social thought. We are National Socialists, meaning that by the people, we do not mean a particular class nor an economic group, but the collective of all the people who speak our language and share our blood. We see no possibility of national pride when there is a well-fed crowd of entrepreneurs, and behind them the emaciated and exhausted working people of our nation, but only when workers of the mind and hand can exist harmoniously, well-fed and in good condition, side by side with each other. We want to lay the foundations for a new worldview in which only those who sacrifice themselves in ardent love for their whole people are considered great. We are convinced that no one in the world will hand us anything. No one else is furthering our cause. We alone must forge our own future. In our people lies the source of all our strength. If our people fall today, we fall with them. It cannot be good for us if our people are ruined. Our people and our state must prosper so that each individual member of it can live. We are not pacifists. We know that the father of all things is struggle. We see our people as a race, and we see its importance in the character of our nation, which must be based on a sense of responsibility to our people. We hold to the immutable principle that every decision requires responsibility. This is why the whole world opposes us. This is why we are considered dangerous to the state, and this is why I am forbidden to speak, why we are censored, because we want our whole German people to recover in body and soul from this cursed division.